December 19th, 1944, a converted French army barracks in Verdun. The most powerful generals in the Allied command sat around a table, and not one of them was smiling. 3 days earlier, over 200,000 German soldiers had smashed through American lines in the Ardennes forest. The offensive had caught Allied intelligence completely by surprise. American units were being overrun, surrounded, wiped out. Dwight Eisenhower, Supreme Allied Commander, had called this emergency meeting to figure out how to stop the disaster. The situation was desperate. The 101st Airborne was surrounded at Bastogne. If that town fell, German armor could split the Allied armies in two and potentially reach the coast. Eisenhower looked around the table and asked the critical question: how soon can someone attack north to relieve Bastogne? The room went quiet. Generals stared at maps calculating logistics, troop movements, supply lines, the distances involved, the winter conditions, the chaos of pulling units out of combat that were already fighting. Then George Patton spoke. "I can attack with 2 divisions in 48 hours. The other generals turned and stared at him. Some thought he was joking. Others thought he was showing off, making promises he couldn't possibly keep. 48 hours to pull 3 divisions out of active combat, rotate an entire army 90 degrees, move over 100,000 men and thousands of vehicles through snow and ice, and launch a coordinated attack against hardened German positions. It was operationally impossible. Every general in that room knew it. But Patton wasn't bluffing. He wasn't showing off. He was the only general in that room who had seen this attack coming, and he had been preparing for it for 11 days. December 9th, 1944, 10 days before the Verdun meeting, Patton's headquarters in Nancy, France. Colonel Oscar Koch walked into Patton's office, carrying a stack of intelligence reports that would change the course of the war. Koch was Patton's G2, his chief intelligence officer. He was careful, detail-oriented, and deeply worried. Koch had been tracking German unit movements across the entire Western Front, and he had noticed something that nobody else seemed to care about. 15 German divisions had vanished. These weren't small units. These were full-strength divisions, including several panzer divisions with hundreds of tanks. They had been pulled off the line and moved somewhere, but Allied intelligence couldn't find them. Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Force, the SHAEF, had an explanation. The Germans were holding these divisions in reserve to respond to Allied breakthroughs. Nothing to worry about. Koch didn't buy it. He had been studying German patterns for months. The Wehrmacht didn't hold 15 divisions in reserve just to react. That was offensive strength. That was enough combat power to launch a major attack. Koch spread his maps across Patton's desk. He pointed to the Ardennes forest, the thinly held sector where American divisions were spread across miles of front. "General, I believe the Germans are planning a major counteroffensive. The target is here, the Ardennes." Patton studied the maps while Koch laid out his case. The Ardennes was the weakest point in the Allied line. 4 American divisions were holding a front that should have required 12. The terrain was difficult, heavily forested, with narrow roads nearly impossible to navigate in winter. That's exactly why SHAEF wasn't worried. The same terrain that made the Ardennes hard to defend also made it hard to attack. No sane commander would launch a major offensive through that terrain in December. But Koch reminded Patton of something. In 1940, the Germans had done exactly that. They had attacked through the Ardennes and reached the English Channel in 6 weeks. It was the campaign that conquered France. Koch had more evidence. German radio traffic had increased dramatically in the sector. Prisoner interrogations mentioned new units arriving. Local civilians reported unusual activity behind German lines. Patton asked Koch a direct question. "If you're right, when does the attack come?" Koch's answer was immediate, within the next 2 weeks. Patton picked up the phone and called Omar Bradley, his immediate superior. He laid out Koch's analysis. Bradley listened, but he wasn't convinced. The SHAEF intelligence disagreed. The war was almost over. Germany was beaten. They didn't have the strength for a major offensive. Bradley told Patton not to worry. Patton hung up the phone and looked at Koch. He didn't say anything for a long moment. Then he gave Koch an order. "Start planning." Over the next 10 days, Patton's staff worked in secret. They developed 3 complete backup plans for responding to a German offensive in the Ardennes. Each plan was detailed down to the minute. Truck routes calculated, fuel supplies positioned ahead of time, artillery batteries designated for rapid redeployment, infantry units assigned specific roads and assembly points. The plans covered every variable. If the German attack came from this direction, Third Army would execute Plan A. If from another direction, Plan B. If the situation required a different response, Plan C. Patton's staff thought their general had lost his mind. Third Army was engaged in offensive operations in the Saar region. They were pushing toward Germany. Why were they planning for a defensive emergency 100 miles to the north? Because Patton trusted Oscar Koch more than he trusted SHAEF. On December 12th, Patton held a meeting with his senior commanders. He told them to be ready to pull out on short notice. He didn't tell them why. He just told them to be prepared. His commanders exchanged looks. Pull out from offensive operations? They were winning. But they were Patton's men. They followed orders. By December 15th, Third Army was the only major American force with backup plans for the Ardennes. Every other unit in the Allied line was focused on their own sectors, confident the war would be over by Christmas. 5:30 a.m., December 16th, 1944. German artillery erupted along an 80-mile front. Thousands of shells slammed into American positions. Then the infantry came. Then the tanks. 3 German armies, over 200,000 men, smashed into 4 American divisions. The Americans were outnumbered nearly 4-1. Units that had been in quiet sectors for rest suddenly found themselves fighting for survival. Communication lines were cut. Commanders lost contact with their troops. At SHAEF headquarters, the first reports were dismissed as a local counterattack. It took hours for the scope of the disaster to become clear. At Bradley's headquarters, disbelief. This couldn't be happening. Allied intelligence had assured them the Germans were finished. The 106th Infantry Division, newly arrived and positioned in the Ardennes for a quiet introduction to combat, was virtually destroyed. 2 entire regiments surrendered, the largest mass surrender of American troops in the European theater. But at Third Army headquarters, the reaction was different. Patton received the first reports and immediately summoned his staff. He looked at Oscar Koch. "You were right. What's their objective?" Koch studied the incoming reports. "Bastogne. They need the road junction, and then Antwerp." Patton nodded. "Give me General Gaffey. We're executing the backup plans." While every other American headquarters scrambled to understand what was happening, Patton was already giving orders. Third Army began pulling out from combat operations in the Saar. The other generals would spend 3 days trying to figure out how to respond. Patton had figured it out 11 days ago. December 19th, the emergency meeting. Eisenhower had called every senior commander in the theater. The situation was grim, but Eisenhower opened with a statement that surprised some present. "The present situation is to be regarded as one of opportunity for us, and not of disaster. There will be only cheerful faces at this conference table." Eisenhower understood something important. The German army had come out of its defensive positions. It was exposed. If the Allies could respond quickly enough, they could turn disaster into victory. But responding quickly was the problem. Every unit was in the wrong place. The logistics of turning everything around seemed impossible. That's when Eisenhower asked his question. How soon can someone attack north to relieve Bastogne? The silence stretched. Generals looked at their maps, calculated distances. Then Patton spoke. "I can attack with 2 divisions in 48 hours, 3 divisions in 72. The room went quiet. Patton was known for aggressive promises, but this seemed beyond aggressive. This seemed delusional. Eisenhower pressed him. "George, this is no time for showing off. The 101st Airborne is surrounded. If we promise relief and can't deliver, those men die." Patton didn't blink. I've already given the